When a narcissist betrays a super empath, they enter the cycle expecting it to unfold exactly as it always has: trick, discard, control, repeat. They move with a certain mechanical confidence, convinced that every manipulation and every emotional tactic will land just as intended. Yet, in their arrogance, they fail to account for the depth and resilience of a super empath. These individuals are not naive, nor are they easily influenced or dependent. They have weathered storms of human chaos and come out with a deep understanding of motives, behaviors, and the subtle ways the heart can be played. Betrayal against such a person is no longer just a transaction, it becomes a trigger for deep transformation, a moment where the balance of power quietly shifts. The moment of betrayal is the turning point where the super empath's hidden strength comes forward. For so long, they have carried the weight of emotional work, offering kindness, loyalty, and patience without expecting anything back. This is not weakness, it is wisdom built through years of watching and understanding how people work. They have seen selfishness, cruelty, and manipulation, and have learned to move through it with grace. When the narcissist breaks trust, it is not the super empath who falls apart. It is the narcissist who faces a challenge like never before. The empath now sees clearly with a sharpness born from experience, and the illusion that once protected the narcissist's fragile ego starts to fade under the light of this awareness. Super empaths live from honesty, loyalty, and emotional depth, qualities often mistaken for being fragile. They are patient because they understand human suffering, forgiving because they understand human error, and caring because they feel the weight of pain that others carry. The narcissist sees these qualities through their own self centered lens, assuming patience is ignorance, compassion is neediness, and depth is weakness. They project their own motives onto the empath, believing the same tricks will bring the same control. Yet, what they do not understand is that a super empath's strength is rooted in knowing themselves and having a clear sense of right and wrong, a quiet but steady inner guide that has been sharpened to see through dishonesty. When the narcissist crosses the line with betrayal that cannot be overlooked, the super empath does not explode in anger or look for payback. Instead, a calm sharpness emerges, clean in its clarity. They see the truth in clear focus. The person they tried to help was never able to grow, never willing to take part in a real give and take, never able to match the care that was given freely. The realization does not hurt, it brings light. Every warning sign, every mixed signal, every trick once excused or explained away now stands out clearly. It is an awakening, driven not by emotion, but by the steady and accurate recognition of patterns that the narcissist depended on to keep power and control. The super empath starts to look back at past events with a detached clarity, studying rather than reacting. They notice the structure of chaos, the careful emotional games, and the planned use of affection and distance. The patterns of control become obvious. Love used as a tool, silence is punishment, approval is bait. Intuition, that was once pushed aside out of love, now becomes a steady guide pointing toward truth with steady accuracy. Betrayal, once a source of pain, turns into a key to freedom. Each uncovering of dishonesty sharpens the empath's perception, letting them see the narcissist's tactics not as human weakness, but as deliberate use of vulnerability. A plan built only to feed an ego that cannot stand on its own. This awakening is complete because super empaths do not experience partial understanding. Once clarity arrives, it is total, steady, and cannot be undone. Nostalgia, hope, or wanting no longer cloud their judgment. They see the narcissist for exactly who they are: a master of control, dependent on others' energy to feel important, afraid of real connection. The power that once seemed so solid instantly disappears because the empath no longer takes part in the emotional performance that kept it going. They stop absorbing blame, ignoring accusations, and pulling away from the need to seek approval or validation. The narcissist faces a mirror that cannot be fooled, and the weakness beneath their confident mask becomes visible in the most humiliating and terrifying way possible. As the empath steps fully into clarity, they take back the pieces of themselves that were pushed aside to keep the relationship going. Confidence, intuition, and self worth come rushing back with undeniable force. Boundaries, once flexible to allow control, become firm and unyielding. Passion and purpose return, grounded in the understanding that kindness is a gift, not a weakness, to be used. With each new understanding, The empath moves further from the narcissist's psychological hold. This process is quiet, not explosive, guided by certainty rather than conflict. They no longer need explanations, apologies, or closure. The illusion has shattered completely, leaving the narcissist for the first time aware that their control is gone and cannot be brought back. The shift in power is immediate and total. The super empath now stands steady, sure of themselves, and unmoved by the narcissist's attempts to influence them. Without emotional energy to take, without attention to twist, without forgiveness to take advantage of, the narcissist starts to come apart inside. The very tactics that once kept them in charge now show their emptiness and lack of security. The empath, having understood and worked through the betrayal, is no longer part of the narcissist's game. They do not fight back. They simply exist in their truth, untouched by the projections and tricks that once held them stuck. The narcissist, stripped of their tools of control, experiences vulnerability and exposure for the first time. In this new balance, the super empath experiences a deep reclaiming of self. Their inner voice grows louder, intuition sharper, and their emotional intelligence becomes a shield rather than something to be drained. They recognize the line between kindness and being used, letting in only those who respect their depth. The narcissist's past dominance falls apart not through fighting, but through lack of involvement. Every expectation, every attempt to get a reaction, and every trick now meets with immunity. The super empath's calm certainty replaces fear, doubt, and dependence with clarity, good judgment, and an unshakable sense of purpose. In this space, power is no longer a tool of control, but a reflection of owning oneself. In the end, the narcissist's betrayal sparks the super empath's full awakening. What was once a source of pain becomes the reason for freedom. They come out not hardened but sharpened, guided by insight rather than hope or illusion. They see patterns, predict manipulation, and understand human behavior with surgical accuracy. Their kindness continues to exist, but now as a choice, not a weakness. The empath moves forward in life, grounded, strong, and fully awake to the truth of human nature. Meanwhile, the narcissist, without the emotional fuel they once relied on, experiences the collapse that comes when control is taken away. The roles are reversed, and for the first time, the super empath stands untouchable, while the narcissist stands exposed and powerless. When a narcissist tries to pull the empath back with old familiar tricks, they meet unexpected resistance. Love bombing, guilt, anger, and playing the victim. These are tools that once got compliance, emotion, or attention. But now they do nothing. The super empath has reached a level of clarity and emotional immunity that makes these tricks useless. What was meant to weaken them only strengthens their awareness, turning betrayal into a trigger for personal power. Every attempt by the narcissist to get back control instead becomes a mirror showing their insecurities, their lies, and the empty shell of their identity. The empath watches without reacting, taking in truth rather than fear. And this quiet strength starts to take apart the illusion the narcissist depended on for so long. The clarity the super empath gains cannot be undone. Once fully awake, the relationship can never go back to how it was. The narcissist's mask, carefully built over a lifetime, is shown in ways they cannot fix. They realize, often with panic, that the person they thought would always be under their influence has finally seen every layer of dishonesty. A super empath's withdrawal is devastating because it removes the source of the narcissist's sense of power. The connection once fueled by emotional currents, attention, and validation from the empath is suddenly cut. Every sigh, every tear, every attempt to comfort or fix was once proof of control. The narcissist assumed devotion meant dependence, failing to see the empath's depth of awareness and inner strength. The moment the empath stops responding is subtle but deep. It is not an outburst or dramatic face-off. It is a quiet, deliberate taking back of energy and boundaries. The narcissist, used to emotional reactions as proof of control, experiences shock. Hooks they thought were unbreakable are ignored. Every attempt to stir jealousy, create guilt, or bring back chaos is met with silence. The empath refuses to play the role given to them, creating a space the narcissist cannot handle. Control, once a natural part of who they were, becomes out of reach. Their carefully built world wavers because emotional involvement, the very thing they thought was power, is no longer available. The emptiness of silence exposes the weakness beneath their big self-image. Withdrawal becomes the super empath's most powerful tool because it comes from self control rather than getting back at someone. The narcissist, desperate for reactions, tries the familiar cycle: sweetness followed by cruelty, apologies followed by blame, charm followed by provocation. Yet nothing works. The empath's silence says far more than words ever could. Each quiet moment highlights the emptiness that previously went unnoticed. The narcissist experiences the lack of control as suffocating because their identity depends on emotional dominance. Without someone to react, their sense of being above others falls apart. The empath, guided by clarity rather than duty, watches the unraveling without satisfaction or anger. Their distance is a quiet proof of the power of owning oneself and inner peace over manipulation and chaos. As the empath turns energy inward, they reclaim themselves in ways the narcissist can neither predict nor change. Confidence rebuilds, intuition strengthens, and boundaries harden, forming a shield against future use. The withdrawal is not punishment. It is a deliberate act of putting themselves first, a statement that kindness will no longer be misused. The narcissist's influence, which once dimmed the empath's inner light, now runs into the reality of independence. Attempts to come back with apologies, dramatic declarations of love, or promises to change fail because the empath now reads these actions through wisdom, not longing. They understand that charm can hide control, that emotional pleas can hide pressure, and that stepping away is sometimes the only true response to ongoing dishonesty. The lack of involvement from the empath takes apart the narcissist's story of being above others. They have relied on compliance to build a story in which they are essential, admired, and in control. When the empath pulls away, that story falls apart. They realize often too late that the drama, emotional ups and downs, and manufactured crises were all kept going by the empath's investment. Without this involvement, the narcissist is left exposed, facing the emptiness of their identity and the weakness of their built image. No charm, no manipulation, no victim act can bring back the balance. The super empath, grounded in awareness and moral clarity, stands unaffected, while the narcissist faces a truth they cannot ignore. Their power only existed as long as someone believed in it. The true skill of the super empath lies in choosing to reclaim themselves without turning to anger or conflict. Withdrawal demands emotional discipline, self respect, and the courage to honor truth over reaction. It signals that peace, self care, and clarity have taken priority over chaos, compromise, or self sacrifice. The empath's energy is turned inward, supporting healing, renewal, and reconnection with their true self. The narcissist, without their usual supply, feels anxiety, frustration, and panic. They cannot handle the stillness because it shows their dependence on others' emotional work. The super empath's distance does not invite further manipulation. It creates a reality that cannot be denied. The relationship cannot work on old patterns. The power balance, long tilted in favor of the narcissist, is permanently reversed. In the end, the empath's withdrawal changes everything. The narcissist may keep trying to get involvement through charm, guilt, dramatics, but these actions no longer have power. The super empath watches, understands, and remains untouched by manipulation. They have traded obligation for good judgment, reaction for insight, and dependence for independence. Each quiet refusal strengthens boundaries and breaks down control. What the narcissist once mistook for weakness is now shown to be wisdom. What they once thought they could use is now an unbreakable fortress of self awareness. The relationship's energy, once taken for control, is reclaimed by the empath, leaving the narcissist exposed, empty, and without power. In silence, the super empath speaks louder than words ever could, showing the ultimate form of strength and emotional freedom. Super empaths understand that real change is impossible for someone who treats relationships as tools rather than real bonds. No amount of hope, pleading, or kindness can change a person whose natural way is control and use of others. Their withdrawal is not a reaction, it is deliberate, a shield that stops them from being pulled back into cycles that once drained their energy and spirit. As distance grows, the narcissist's instability becomes painfully obvious. Emotions that were once hidden behind performance now change unpredictably. Their composure cracks, their patience wears thin, and the cracks in their carefully kept image become more frequent. The narcissist strikes out, blames others, and falls into self pity, unable to understand how they lost someone they thought was theirs to control. This imbalance shows the narcissist not just to the empath, but to themselves. They face a reality they have long avoided. Their power was never truly theirs, never earned. It was borrowed, taken from the emotional generosity of someone they tried to break. Every attempt to dominate relied on the empath's investment, their attention, and their energy. The super empath's silence, their refusal to take part, strikes at the foundation of this borrowed authority. Withdrawal signals independence, sets boundaries, and marks a power shift that cannot be undone. The narcissist, without emotional control, faces emptiness they spent a lifetime running from. This is the start of a descent, quiet but steady, into a space of being irrelevant and exposed. Betrayal, which once might have wounded a lesser soul, instead awakens the super empath's hidden strength. Within every empath lies resilience so deep that it often stays invisible until circumstances force it to come out. The narcissist, assuming emotional superiority, underestimates this capacity. They see sensitivity as weakness, failing to recognize that awareness itself is power. When the illusion falls apart, when betrayal lands, and when the empath finally sees the full picture of manipulation, an unshakable determination rises. The empath no longer shrinks, no longer overexplains, and no longer sacrifices themselves to keep what was never healthy. Pain becomes the trigger, sparking clarity and leading to a reclaiming of self that the narcissist never saw coming. At first, the shock of betrayal stings. The empath is briefly shaken, not because they failed to see warning signs, but because hope often clouded reason. Patterns were ignored in favor of believing that love could change the course of someone's selfish ways. Betrayal tears through emotions, showing where trust was given too freely, where intuition was pushed aside, and where attempts to heal what could not be healed were made. Yet, instead of falling apart, the super empath begins to rise. Pain turns into a guide, a truth teller, reflecting every moment of doubt, every time personal boundaries were ignored, every attempt to steady what was never steady. Pain organizes rather than destroys, bringing scattered emotional pieces into alignment. This awakening is subtle but unstoppable. The super empath starts by making a simple choice to stop carrying the weight of someone else's problems. Each decision is a reclaiming of self, a deliberate refusal to take part in chaos. They stop excusing cruelty, reject blame that is not theirs, and stop over explaining to someone who refuses to listen. Boundaries become strongholds, truth becomes freedom. The very pain that once seemed unbearable turns into a map for empowerment. It sharpens perception, strengthens resolve, and reconnects the empath to parts of themselves that were quieted with each step. Clarity grows, lighting up patterns that were once misunderstood, showing manipulation, flattery, and emotional games for exactly what they were. The empath begins to see with steady clarity how the narcissist built dependence through subtle means: flattery to get compliance, silence to create fear, chaos to control outcomes, and kindness to create obligation. Every act once seen as affection or care is shown to be a tool of control. Forgiveness, once given freely, is understood as a weapon that the narcissist used to manipulate. Yet this understanding does not weaken the empath, it strengthens them. For the first time, they step fully out of the fog of manipulation and into a space of clear, unshakable truth. Their awareness is now a shield and a guide, leading them away from patterns that once trapped them and into the full strength of their own emotional freedom. As this transformation takes hold, the empath's inner power becomes real. No longer tied to the narcissist's moods, projections, or schemes, they stand firmly within themselves. Emotional energy, once given up for survival and connection, is now turned inward, supporting healing, growth, and reconnection with a self that had been dimmed. Every boundary reinforced, every truth acknowledged, and every act of self respect builds strength. The empath sees betrayal not as failure, but as a clarifying event, proof of the narcissist's nature rather than their own lack of worth. Pain, once a threat, becomes a teacher. Awareness, once uncertain, becomes a fortress. And through this process, the empath steps fully into power, ready to live from clarity rather than illusion. The super empath no longer feels forced to rescue, explain, or sacrifice themselves for someone who refuses to take responsibility. Betrayal, which once might have felt like a wound, now becomes the ultimate teacher, a lesson that moves them into true power. Their change is subtle, quiet, and unstoppable, unsettling the narcissist in ways they cannot twist or control. Charm, guilt, or pleading. The weapons they once relied upon now land like empty gestures. Awareness cannot be twisted, and once it arrives, the spell that held the empath in place is broken. Strength comes not through fighting, but through stepping back. The empath focuses on healing, rebuilding, and realigning with passions, relationships, and values that were set aside. Each step strengthens independence and self respect. As they reclaim their emotional space, clarity becomes the empath's shield, replacing confusion with precision. They see the narcissist not as someone needing fixing, but as someone defined by patterns of control and self interest. This distance shows weaknesses that were once hidden beneath charm and control. The narcissist's emotions wobble unpredictably. Their mask slips and they strike out in attempts to get back control. Blame, self pity, and victimhood come up as their inner imbalance becomes impossible to hide. The empath's absence shows the truth. The power the narcissist thought they had was borrowed, not real. The withdrawal is not punishment. It is a quiet, firm taking back of the emotional authority the narcissist assumed they would always hold. Pain, betrayal, and disappointment turn into triggers for empowerment. The empath recognizes that their worth was never tied to putting up with mistreatment, but to the strength they carried all along. The initial shock of betrayal is only a brief stir. Patterns that were once explained away or ignored now become clear understanding. Every attempt to fix, every ignored intuition, and every compromise of self becomes clear evidence of the narcissist's character. Pain organizes rather than breaks, pulling emotional pieces into alignment. Awareness deepens, and the empath stops carrying responsibility for problems that were never theirs. Each boundary set, each truth accepted is a step toward freedom, turning pain into a tool for change rather than a source of weakness. This inner awakening lets the empath see manipulation in its true form. They see flattery used to build dependence, silence used to create fear, chaos used to control outcomes, and kindness used for gain. Love, forgiveness, and care are recognized as gifts that were misused, not as weaknesses on the part of the empath. This recognition does not lessen their ability to care, it strengthens it. The empath steps fully into clarity, moving from the fog of emotional entanglement into a space of unshakable truth. Awareness becomes armor, experience becomes a guide. Every interaction, every memory, and every pain becomes a reference point, letting them handle relationships without confusion, expectation, or manipulation. Distance in this sense is not a reaction, it is a growth of understanding. The empath stops putting emotional energy into the narcissist's story, stops defending themselves, and gives up the pointless effort of getting recognition or responsibility from someone unwilling to change. Every attempt at provocation, charm, or love bombing is met with calm neutrality. Admiration once given freely is turned inward, forming the foundation for self esteem and personal authority. Emotional energy is now put into healing, growth, and self discovery, making the empath unshakable. The narcissist, faced with the lack of reactions and validation, feels panic and helplessness. Without emotional compliance, the structure that held their control falls apart, exposing the weakness of a self image built on the dependence and admiration of others. The withdrawal of admiration is especially damaging because it targets the narcissist's core identity. They do not mourn the person they lost. They mourn the loss of psychological fuel that made them feel important. Super empaths notice the small signs, the emotional work, the attention, and the depth they once offered, all of which had kept the narcissist's sense of power going. Once removed, every new source of validation feels empty, showing how shallow their control really was. The empath's clarity turns what was once admiration into understanding, and understanding breaks the spell. Distance becomes the ultimate form of power, a conscious refusal to take part in manipulation, a return of focus and energy towards self, and a reclaiming of control over emotions that were once used against them. With clarity and distance, the empath creates a shift that the narcissist cannot undo. Their presence alone no longer provides admiration, validation, or emotional support. The narcissist's attempts to get back dominance through charm, apologies, grand gestures, or shows of confidence are filtered through the empath's awareness and fail to get through. Without involvement, the narcissist cannot take control. They become frantic, swinging between arrogance, anger, and self pity. Each attempt shows desperation. The empath stays steady, energy intact, and boundaries untouched. Every day of quiet distance further strengthens independence and self respect. Emotional mastery replaces reactive patterns, turning past pain and betrayal into a deep, unshakable power that the narcissist cannot predict, twist, or copy. Finally, the empath begins to turn admiration, attention, and care inward. Energy that was once spent on someone incapable of true give and take is now put into self discovery, healing, and growth. Each act of self care, each boundary reinforced, each passion followed builds strength. The narcissist watching this change feels irrelevant and exposed. Their identity, rooted in outside approval, starts to fall apart under the weight of absence and awareness. The empath's distance is not about revenge. It is the final proof that kindness and admiration cannot be forced or taken. They can only exist within a framework of honesty, respect, and truth, qualities the narcissist consistently lacked. This is the ultimate turning point where power fully shifts to the super empath.